Thank you for taking time to watch this session of the 2021 Illinois State Historical Society History Symposium. In this presentation, Mark Pohlad of DePaul University interviews Decatur, Illinois-based sculptor John McClarey. We learn about McClarey's long and distinguished career as he takes us on a journey of his many works that feature Abraham Lincoln throughout the state. McClarey concludes with some profound thoughts about what a Lincoln statue means, or could or should mean, in this day and age of fractured politics and society. This session was recorded on March 14, 2021. For more information about the Illinois State Historical Society, including membership information and additional videos from the symposium, visit the ISHS website at historyillinois.org.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Pohlad. I'm an associate professor of art history at DePaul University in Chicago. And today I'm joined by John McClarey, who is, put simply, the most prolific and important sculptor of Abraham Lincoln artworks in the world. So I'm excited to talk with him about his art and ideas. But first, let me give you a bit of a background. And John, you'll correct me if I misstep here. John is a self-taught artist, and many important historical artists have been self-taught, of course. And he's an avid student of both history and Lincoln. He became especially interested in Lincoln while working towards his master's degree in history at Illinois State University. Now, his very first pieces were small, such as busts of Lincoln, as he pursued a career as a public school teacher and later working for the Illinois Department of Commerce and Community Affairs in Springfield. And I've read that you used to visit the Lincoln materials in the Sangamon Valley collection on your lunchtime, which is fantastic. A major career highlight was when John received a commission for a Lincoln bust from the Russian State Library for Foreign Literature in 1998. And after this, in the new millennium, his career went into overdrive with commissions for full-scale public sculptures and awards pouring in. Now, I can't list all of John's works here, but we'll cover some of them in the interview that follows. And you've seen them and have your favorites, as have I. They're found in Springfield and Vandalia, Taylorville, Charleston, Rockford, Metamora, Peoria, Hillsborough, and elsewhere. You've even made some important tabletop sculptures, John, that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But just so our viewers know, John is speaking from his home in Decatur, Illinois, where he has a studio in his barn. So, John, it's so good to be with you. I've been looking forward to this. Would you like to make a statement before we get going?
Yes, well, thank you, Mark. Yeah, I want to say this, most of the great leaders in history at some time or other in their career faced a barrage of criticisms. And that's a real doubter. But on the other hand, the great leaders along the way somewhere had eureka moments where they came up with ideas that they thought were good for the country that might find a public support. And then some of them did. Well, Lincoln was one of those characters that did have a lot of criticism for some of his ideas, freeing the slaves and that sort of thing. But he moved on. He moved on beyond that and set the criticisms aside and moved on towards his objectives. And that's the perspective I think you'll see in some of the comments that I make of what I want to show, that Lincoln broke the blockades, so to speak, in many ways. And we'll look at the blockades as they come down, and we'll look at them through a perspective of art.
Fantastic. I can't wait. So first things first, John, how did you get started making Lincoln sculpture?
Well, I think I was about 10 years old, and my mother was not an artist, but she was an art collector and very interested in all phases of art, and saw her two sons had an interest. And we went to a lot of art shows and institutions where there could find art collections. And she decided when I was about 10 years old that she would introduce something new to me, and that was sculpturing. And she gave me a bar of ivory soap. You remember the soap that floats? That I could use that, which I did, as long as I saved the shavings for the family wash. So that's what you expect of a post-Depression era minded mother, you know.
That's right.
And so
I
I've done
imagine,
a
yeah.
yeah, I've done a lot of drawings since and since then in my early years and in my teen years, all kinds of drawings and in contests and one thing or another. But it wasn't until I was 18 years old that I started my first year in college that I happened to go by the art department and I saw a bust, life-size bust had been created by Lincoln. And I put it in my mind that, I'd like to do that sometime. But it wasn't until after I'd finished grad school, I was already 35 years old, that I really started the three-dimensional work.
That's fantastic. You know, we've talked a little bit about this. Mothers are so important for exposing their children to art and culture and music and that sort of thing. My mother was important for me in that way too. Okay, well, I've been interested in asking you about this. When I see your work, I have a little understanding about how they're made. I think a lot of people might not know, actually, because they're metal and they're bronze. So could you speak for just a minute about how they're made?
Yeah, sure. Depending on the size, they may require an armature to hang the clay on, okay? Um, or some kind of a support system. And then once you get the figure like you want it, then you put a two-piece, usually a two-piece for a two-piece rubber mold
Mhm.
over the clay, and that's so you can pull the sides of the mold apart. And then you put a mother mold, a plaster mold around the rubber to hold it together when you're casting. And then if you're ready to cast, then you turn it upside down and pour the casting material in there if you're using plaster or if you're using a resin and with bronze mix called cold cast, uh, cold bronze casting. So that's how you make the little ones. The bigger ones are made similarly, only it requires a much different kind of structure for the large pieces. Some of them, most of my pieces are life sized, and some of them are even larger than that. It requires a lot of work, and those are finished pieces that are done at a foundry through what they call the lost wax process, which takes a little while to develop. But that's what it's called, the lost wax process or bronze casting, and that's what you do at the foundries.
That goes back to the ancient Greeks, if
Yes,
I
it does.
remember. Okay, and
And not
then
only for that, the Etruscans in the Aegean area already had bronze casting that predated the Greeks and Romans. So
wow, and then of course, when the foundry is ready to with your work, you show up at the site and then watch it as the piece gets placed into position, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, I usually make several trips to the foundry because I want to make sure that all the processes are right. And I've chosen foundries that are very, very conscious of that. I took a course in bronze casting myself at the University of Illinois in 1978. So I like to go and watch the process. And that's very interesting. You ever get a chance to do it, it's very, very interesting.
it sounds fascinating. Well, wonderful. Well, let's move on and talk a little bit about Lincoln and sculpture. And I guess the notion is how does a sculpture, a sculpture is so much more than just the three-dimensional image of somebody. How does a sculpture of Lincoln help people visualize and understand him?
Yeah, I use a lot of symbolism in my art. Uh, I'll start with the House Divided piece that's found in Charleston, Illinois, on the old fairgrounds and also near the Lincoln Douglas Museum. Um, There's a lot of symbolism here. I took my inspiration for that piece from Lincoln's House Divided speech.
Mm.
House divided against itself cannot stand. So what I used to illustrate the house divided was a lot of symbolism with the rock structures on the left and right side of a chasm or a divide between the structures. The rock structures on both sides of the chasm represented the fracture, real deep division in the Union and the rock of our foundations. And on both sides, one side or the other, one side you had Lincoln and the other side you had Douglas. And these two men were facing each other across this chasm, this divide. And what I think is kind of interesting about that, both of these men, I think, loved the Union. Loved the Union, and they welcome debate, and are often respective of each other. But they had difference of opinions as to how to save the nation. So it's interesting that the chasm is wide enough that people can walk through it on their way to the museum, and they can pause for a moment in time if they'd like to in the middle of the chasm, looking at the rock and the figures on the opposite sides, and get some feeling of what was going on in this debate and why the men were so far apart. They weren't great friends, but they did have respect for each other. For example, I'm sure you heard the old story at Lincoln's first inaugural. Washington attended the inaugural and holding the stovepipe hat of Abraham Lincoln on his.
Yes, Douglas, he did that.
That itself is a symbol of, I respect the voting tradition. I lost, the other party won. I'm going to do everything I can to be supportive of the winner. And I think all of that, that part of the sculpture speaks to that. And then on the second piece, Raw Determination, is a sculpture that's found in Rockford, Illinois, not too far from the Rock River, downtown, very close to the Civic Center and also the old courthouse. Okay, so that has some similarities in that this 2.5 size bust of Lincoln is really taller than me when I was working on it, is fractured. You can see the fractures in the rock because Lincoln was a part of the fractured Union. Okay, yeah, and so you can see him glancing to one side as though he's looking at the beautiful Rock River, which he greatly adored. But he's got his mind set on things, and friends often said that they could tell when Lincoln had made a decision that he was going to keep by the way he set his jaw. And so this sculpture shows the way he set his jaw. That's where they get this iron determination. But there's another aspect of this symbolism which you don't really see. Lincoln said of himself that his mind was like a sheet of steel, that it was very difficult to scratch. But if it was ever scratched, it was very hard to remove. Okay, so that's where this raw determination, iron determination comes in. Once he'd made up his mind to do something, and he was in a period in 1859 where the rebellion was already underway, he's beginning to frame some thoughts if he should become presidential candidate and win. He wanted to have a game plan and something that he could stick with, which was the case. But raw determination is I think is a beautiful piece, but it says a lot about Lincoln.
Yes,
in this era, kind of person that once he came up with an idea, if it was a good idea, he didn't back down. Just like just like emancipation. When he finally made up his mind to move ahead with that, despite a lot of opposition, he felt that he had made a promise to God in history, okay, that he would do something when it was the opportune time to do it, to free the slaves. And he also remarked that if he failed to carry out his promise to God in history, he would burn in hell for eternity. Quite a statement, yeah.
Right. Well, you know,
all determination, iron determination. Yeah.
broad determination. Yeah. You know, I'm not. Now that I think of it, I have a lot to look for in your works by way of symbolism, and I'm glad you were kind of talking about. I might not have noticed the set jaw, for instance, or you know, I hope I would think about the political division in Charleston as I experienced that sculpture. But you know what, John, is when I think about your works and I think about the other Lincoln sculptures, you know, that can be broken down into this one's the Lincoln as the emancipator, or this one Lincoln the statesman, this is standing Lincoln, this is Lincoln holding the Emancipation Proclamation. When I think about your works, they're so unique. I mean, one has a pig in it. They often have more than one figure. They often show not just Lincoln, but a particular, as you've been talking, historical moment or an idea. So can you speak about this aspect, the unique aspect of your works?
Yeah. Okay. A couple of sculptures that relate to this I think. One of them is Lincoln Draws a Line in Peoria, Illinois, at a debate close to the old courthouse. You can see the new courthouse in the background. Debate with Lincoln and a debate with Douglas. This is 1854. Wasn't a part of the later debates. And the line is very, very symbolic. If you see the sculpture, you might be able to see the line that we had put in the marble on the courtyard where he stands. You can see the line where he drew the line, and he's pointing to it, and it has a lot of symbolism. And to understand the meaning of that line, you have to go back in history, really. The draws a line idea is not a new idea, and it wasn't original with Lincoln. You catch it in the Roman era where the Roman Senate warned the governors, the military guys who were guarding the northern provinces, never to cross the Rubicon. If they did so, it'd be never bring their armies across the Rubicon, this river in the north, on the pain of death. So this drawing the line thing is not new with Lincoln, but it has to be understood from looking at it from the perspective of what's behind the line and what's in front of the line. So if we start with what was behind the line, Lincoln, at first in 1854, was thinking that you better best to leave slavery alone in the South, where it has been growing for a long time. It is deeply rooted in the American soil and the American consciousness. It's too big of a weed to pluck out. Okay, and to attempt to pluck it out, the physician, he refers to the physician, might have to cut so deep to get it out that he would destroy the patient or the South or a broader context, the nation, and have an effect on the world, because you would destroy an economy that a lot of people depend upon, for cheap cotton, for cheap cotton supplied by slave labor. So it wouldn't be a good idea at this time in 1854, and this is where he was in his thinking, would be a good time to cut that out, because you would endanger the patient or the public. On the other side of the line was the opportunity side of the line, as you know, that slavery should not be allowed to move into the regions west of the Mississippi River, where those new territories and states are being formed. should give democracy a chance to grow free from the culture of slavery, and that might put it in people's mind that slavery is on the road to extinction. So that's where he was in that period of time. So those two illustrations I think are unique. I think some of the rest of them are too, but this drawing the line is needs to be understood because Lincoln met that. That's where he was at that particular time.
Absolutely.
A fixed line, an absolute line. You don't dare cross this. Not on pain or death, but you don't dare cross this line, or catastrophe, or more slavery in the entire nation. So,
Very good.
it's the only, according to the Chicago Tribune, it's the only sculpture of Lincoln, a bronze sculpture of Lincoln that has a pig in it.
This is the last stop in Taylorville. Okay.
Yeah, this is the last stop for lawyers and judges on their route before they return to home to Springfield and otherwise. Okay, so this is the last stop. So Lincoln is looking at this pig. Well, it also relates to a story or a legend, really, where the pigs were making such a noise and being so rowdy underneath the courthouse that Lincoln, in his funny way, asked the judge for a writ of quietus as though that would stop the pigs, which it didn't. So Lincoln is looking at the pig, has a smile on his face. He enjoys humor. And there's reasons why he enjoys humor and used it in his leadership. He saw the pig running away from him with the judge's writ in the pig's mouth. So okay, we can go to the next part here then.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that work. It's so funny, John, that one might be unique among Lincoln sculptures in general for being, about his sense of humor and for being genuinely lighthearted and sweet. So, you know what, as long as we're talking about favorite works, do you have favorite works of your own, ones that you think came out exactly the way he wanted them to, or just favorite pieces?
I think of all of them, Lincoln, Less Debate runs pretty high on my list. It's a debate was held in Shelby County at Shelbyville, Illinois, in front of the courthouse. There was two figures, Anthony Thornton and Abraham Lincoln, and the period was 1856 during the presidential election. And it shows Anthony Thornton extending the invitation to Lincoln to let's debate. But it was more than just a debate. These men, as their background, were friends, and they respected each other greatly, and it showed in the debate. And after the debates are over, and they worked on some of the same court cases, but usually after they're over, these two men would get together somewhere. They'd play handball in the streets against a brick wall somewhere. And Shelbyville, they probably went down to the Kaskaskia River to fish and so on and so forth. But at night, they stayed out at an old inn in Shelbyville, and they talked about principles of American law and how it applied to the case, to the presidential election and all these things. And they told stories and jokes, and the townspeople even came in to the old inn to sit down and listen to these guys, because that was a high entertainment for the day. Yeah, it was.
Absolutely.
And so I wanted to mention that because it says something to us today. We've got so much anger, so much name calling, so much character assassination in our public discourse that it's almost a disgrace. And we need to learn together, learn to appreciate each other and respect each other, even though we don't agree.
Absolutely.
And I wish the General Assembly of the state of Illinois would mix up their seating arrangement and put Democrats and Republicans so they can sit together and get to know each other a little bit better.
Yeah, right.
We need to find a way to break down our differences and respect other people and their rights and positions.
Absolutely. Actually, that reminds me of the title of another of your works, Among Friends.
I'll mention that's one of my favorites, very high, because it's unique. I think it's Hillsborough, Illinois, Montgomery County. It could have been in the 30s. It could be in the early 40s. Lincoln often stopped at Hillsborough to see his friends. But this particular time, you can see Lincoln. It looks like he may have just gotten out of his carriage, and looks a little disheveled, and his tie is not tied very well, and his vest is open. And the title of it is Among Friends. He dropped in to see his friends quite often in this city, and again, that ties into our politics today. We need to be friends, but it also says something else about Lincoln. The backdrop is the Hillsborough Courthouse, but in the front of the plaza where the sculpture is located, there's a big broadside which shows that a circus was going to be held the next day. And so he's there among friends. He's dropped his briefcase. He has an umbrella in his hand because it's supposed to rain the next day, but he's looking forward to seeing his friends at the circus because he loved circuses, particularly high wire acts. Later on in his career, he'd visit Niagara, and whether he saw that Pohlad, I think it was a French aerialist crossing that great gorge of the Niagara, I don't know, but the high wire circus acts were among his favorites, but so was a lot of other different kinds of entertainment.
Oh yeah,
and helped him to deal with his sorrow and his tragedies in his life to get a better perspective. And sometimes it helped him to put his friends at ease and to gain support for a particular objective he had in mind too.
That's right. Absolutely.
And then, yeah, I got time to do the Decatur one.
I think so.
Well, the Decatur one is Vision for a Greater Illinois. And it features Lincoln in about 1837 with the courthouse in the background, the old log courthouse in the background where he practiced law. At the same time, he was a member of the General Assembly in Vandalia. And it shows Lincoln holding a map in his hand. He's pointing to Decatur because Decatur was very important to his vision. What he envisioned, he wasn't the only one, but in the middle 1830s, he already envisioned that Decatur could be a hub in a vast transportation system that would help to make Decatur, Illinois, the granary for the world, which included not only improvement in roads and harbors and muddy highways, but also a system of rails. When you put them all together, it helped them to reach markets in the east, would help them to move down the Gulf of Mexico, where they would meet the ships from countries from all over the world, and they would do exchanges and whatever products and services that they had. So he had this vision this early on, and it's a vision that continues right now. Decatur does have an inland intermodal port, okay, but the history of that goes back to Lincoln's vision and also the Governor Duncan and also Stephen Douglas. They were all in on this together, had this great vision for Decatur to be a hub in that kind of system.
Fantastic. So those are some of your favorite pieces. Now, I understand recently you've been concentrating on some smaller tabletop sculptures. And these are different, of course, than the full-length figures that we see in the public squares and courthouses. Can you show us a couple of those? Oh yes, he's making this gesture.
Yeah, this piece here is one of my favorite. It's called disenthrallment. It comes from an old medieval word meaning slavery. Okay, Lincoln had to come to the point in his life where he had to move beyond his stereotypes and prejudices. He had to break his own chains. This sculpture shows the broken chains at his feet. Not completely broken, but partly broken. The iron bar is off of his left ankle, is still on his right ankle, and he has a key in his pocket, so he can unlock that. He is completely free of his slave ideas. And once Lincoln made a speech, I think it was in 1862, State of the Union, where he said to the nation, we must disenthrall ourselves, and then we can save our nation. I think that's
I love that. That's one of my favorite words that he uses.
Yeah.
Yeah, he only uses that word that one time, as far as I know, but it's a fantastic word.
Now, this small sculpture has two features in it.
Okay.
So it's on a swivel, and it indicates something about Lincoln's perception and his knowledge of history and events. And one of them was his understanding of ideas that have been around for eternity, almost for eternity, and that is the common right of humanity versus the divine right of kings. Okay, the common right of humanity is illustrated in this picture of a medieval peasant with a short-handled hoe, who's just stopped from his drudgery for a moment to glance upward and maybe think how life might be different for his children and grandchildren someday. But for then, he will be under toil for his master for the rest of his life. And here is the other side of the divine right of kings, where you see the king is wearing a crown, a scepter, suggesting divine authority for his rule, and then the royal robe. We're still dealing with both issues today. With the common right of humanity, or where we favor the elite and the powerful, the kingly, people among us. I remember in history class, sometimes after the revolution, I would assign my kids to find evidence of we still think in terms of a king in some way, like Royal Crown Cola, the drink,
Oh yeah, that's right.
And then bring back their examples the next day. So this kingly idea has not completely died out of our culture, and certainly not of the presidency. King is not above the law. Well, sometimes our president seems like they're above the law and that sort of thing. So it's still with us today.
That's a fascinating work, because it doesn't even show Lincoln, but it's an idea that Lincoln really loved to address, the law that says you toil and produce and I'll eat it. It's amazing. You have one, you have one more there, John?
Yeah, one more here real quick. This is Lincoln and the Black Hawk War and his counterpart, Black Hawk on the Black Hawk side. And what I show here is Lincoln's only 25 years old, but both Lincoln and Black Hawk had entrenched views. At 25, Lincoln only understood, I think, beliefs like manifest destiny. It's the God-given right of the superior culture of the white people to spread their civilization from sea to shining sea. I think he understood that. We see his folding his arms as though he's made up his mind, and he somehow has to preserve that belief that that it's a God. The whole country was God-given. It's a paradise. It's a Garden of Eden set aside for the whites. This represents Black Hawk. Black Hawk's also got his arms folded. Just entrenched position, hey, a good chunk of this Illinois country belongs to us. It was given to us by the Great Spirit, and we're going to fight for it. So that's what these two pieces represent.
That's great. I can't sculpture that has both Black Hawk and Lincoln in the same artwork doesn't really come to mind. I don't know if I've ever seen that. But that's a wonderful idea. Two competing ideas about the destiny of the country. Yeah, very good. Well, you've touched on this a lot, John, about our contemporary situation and how passionately divided our country is. but what is Lincoln's role, and what is the role of Lincoln artworks in all the political unrest, or does it have a way of addressing our current situation, do you think?
It does, and I would choose a greater task sculpture in Springfield, Illinois, at Union Park across from the Lincoln Museum and Library, as one that maybe illustrates this the best. Lincoln is standing there, a 9.5 tall statue, and he's looking to the east. He's getting ready to move to Washington, D.C. to take on the greatest assignment, greatest position given to any American citizen, that is the presidency of the United States, which he's won in a fair election. And so his left hand is extended out in friendship, okay? He is, one hand is holding his coat close together because it's a rainy morning and cool in February of 1861. But it also represents the wind that was blowing against him, the winds of opposition. He knew what he was facing. He knew that there was a rebellion and what he was up against. So here's the crux of this thing and an understanding, I think. He understood that Washington's mission was to help build a new nation. He understood that his mission was going to be to save that nation in peril and to offer and promise the American people a new birth of freedom. He was on track. He was on track. This statue shows that he was on track.
Mm. Fantastic. And, you know, I like that work a great deal. And it makes me think that your works have a lot of dynamism, a lot of motion. There's gestures and the wind blowing, as you've said, or, you know, a pig running and Lincoln gesturing. Somehow you managed to break Lincoln free from that, you know, the robot kind of standing frozen statesman, and really talk about ideas in your work, and ideas that are relevant now, just like Lincoln was relevant in his own moment. So very good. Well, John, it's been great hearing more about you and your work. We'd like to thank Devin Hunter and the conference for inviting us to participate. And we thank all of you attendees for your good attention. Now, if you'd like to see more of John's work, you can see his Facebook page, the several YouTube posts about him, or simply Google John McClarey and Lincoln to see the dozens of newspaper stories of his various sculptures and their dedications. So thank you. Thank you, John.
Now they can come to my studio and gallery in Decatur, Illinois, if they'd like.
Excellent. Yeah, maybe I'm going to be coming. I'll be maybe one of the first to get there. But thanks again.
You're welcome. No, thank you.
Okay.
It's been fun.
Fantastic.